Okay. Sorry about that. I had some technical problems. It's now just after 4. Call the meeting to order. The City of London is committed to making every effort to provide alternate formats and communication supports for council, standing or advisory committee meetings, and information upon request. To make a request for any city service, please contact accessibility@london.ca or 519-661-2489, extension 2425. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? There being none, are there any consent items to be pulled? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have some questions about 2.2, and I think it might be better for us to pull that than just try and deal with it with everything else.
Sure. Any others? All right. We have a mover and seconder for all the other items. Moved by Councillor Van Hoel, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Any further comments? We'll call the vote. No? I thought you were moving it.
I did move it, but you jumped to moving.
I jumped right to the vote.
Yeah, I've got a number of comments. So
Excellent. Go ahead.
thank you very much. So first thing, noticing that on 2.9 and 2.7, we're a little more than $1 million over budget on some projects. There's no criticism there, just pointing out that this kind of thing can happen. And so we've got contingencies to deal with these things, but these things sometimes happen when you're digging. So I want to talk about 2.4 and 2.5. So we've got this is the update and next steps for the London Waste to Resources Innovation Center. We're signing we've got a number of memorandums of understanding there. Some research is going on, and this is really important research because we don't yet have a great way to deal with waste. And looking to the future, those things may come. And so I think it's important that we're doing this and providing an opportunity for that research to happen. In 2.5, we're looking specifically at reduction as a means of doing this. So this is pretty exciting, an exciting technology, trying to turn things almost directly into methane, because we're basically breaking it up into very tiny pieces. We talked about a company, Purifics, which recently that has a method similar to this to dealing with the treatment of water. You simply slice up the chemicals into really small pieces, and they're no longer a problem. The other neat thing about something like this, which is basically reacting our garbage with hydrogen to make methane, is that there's other technologies coming to the fore as well. So MIT found out that there was some catalytic ways to split water into oxygen and hydrogen that takes much less energy. So we're going to be seeing opportunities where numerous technologies will come together and make really affordable ways for us to move forward. So I think that's exciting. I'm glad we're going forward with this. And I want to talk about 2.14, the comments on Environmental Registry of Ontario. They had a report reducing litter and waste in our communities. This is a discussion paper, and our staff is, I think, stressing the really most important thing, which is producer responsibility. So yes, we as homeowners can do things about garbage, but often we just buy products and have to dispose of the packaging. And when we can look to the producers to be responsible for that, so it's no longer an externality as they describe it, then they've got a stake in the game. And so this is, I think, a really significant way for us to go forward with this. Now, if we went to Vegas together, Mr. Chair, and I said, hey, how is it that all of these casinos are so opulent? You'd say, well, Michael, the odds for every game are in favor of the house. They win by design. And I think that's what we want to do, is set things up so that we're winning by design, and simply designing this so that the producers take the responsibility for the packaging, and they're motivated to create packaging that's less impactful. And that's going to be a benefit for everyone. So thank you for those comments. And that's the end of my remarks, Mr. Chair, on this pretty thick agenda.
Was there an invitation for me to join you in Vegas there somewhere?
Yes, but remember what happens in Vegas.
All right, I can do that. Any other comments? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to staff, I just wanted to touch on the cycling program, and in particular, in item 2.6, the environmental programs annual overview update. I know that work is being done on a ride share program for cyclists, and I certainly think that that's a good idea for our community to move forward on. But I noted in here that we were talking about some work being done on that in 2019, and with the focus being on the downtown, with the bike share business case coming forward, are we going to be looking at rolling out after the My Dundas Flex Street construction is completed and the York Street sewer separations? I mean, we have a bike lane deficiency in the city. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. And my concern is just that we might be getting the cart a little bit ahead of the horse in terms of a lot of torn up infrastructure and a lack of bike lane infrastructure right now that might dissuade use from the bike share in the early days. So I just wonder if staff can sort of comment on what the timelines look like for potential rollout and how that integrates with our infrastructure renewal efforts.
Through the chair, a very important comment. From a bike share perspective, we plan on having a report before Civic Works somewhere probably around the July-August timeframe. That would be a report that would provide a status on the project and the next steps. Next steps would, at this point, quite likely look like going to the marketplace with a request for proposals. Through that, we would get a better determination of how long these things take to implement. But the earliest we believe a program like this would be in place would not be until probably, at the earliest, might be with council's approval, summer of 2020. So that means some of the construction, obviously from this summer, will have been put to rest, particularly the projects that you had identified. Very important for us to have a whole bunch of things moving in the same direction at the same time. So that'll all be part of considerations as we go forward.
No, that was good, Mr. Chair. That's okay. I just assumed it was the drugs. No, Mr. Stanford's answered my question.
I'm sorry, so.
Well, I guess if we have time for a follow-up question, can we put one of those bike share corrals in Ward 2?
Referring to 2.4, just a question. Through you, Chair, to the staff, how long has the London Waste to Resources Innovation Centre been operating?
Through the chair, we got started in probably early 2015, and it was a very, very slow start, very methodical as we started to put together different partners. So our activity level has been one of, as people come forward with ideas and we sign memorandums of understanding, we get busy. When things slow down, it's less impactful on staff time. When we got involved with Western University, we definitely saw an increase in activity. And in fact, it was through their leadership that the contract that is before you tonight, they've lined up many of those partners with our help. But as you see there, it's quite a nice list of companies coming together, bringing their expertise and working through Western University, and we're quite pleased to be part of that team.
I think, yeah, I was encouraged to see the partnership there. Just wondering, has there been any initiatives have resulted from that group since it's been since 2015?
Through the chair, we have covered off a lot of different things, and in fact, in your report today, if you wouldn't mind turning to page 51, it's in Appendix B. We've outlined a number of the activities that have occurred, including the types of research that has been underway, the use of students up at Western University, including some postdocs and PhD students. We've also highlighted a number of the companies that we continue to do work with. In fact, the second item on your report tonight following this is a company that we were once doing work with, ran into a bit of a patent problem, and that's not a surprise when things like new and innovative projects. So that one had to be put on hold. The agreement expired. We're now before you tonight to reinitiate conversation with that particular company. The other thing that became very useful in all of this is that as part of our 60% waste diversion activities, we're also doing a larger resource recovery strategy, looking out into the broader field of what is potential out there. We would not have access to as much information if we didn't have access to these kind of companies and the university for essentially research that is not easy to come by right now. So it's really helping to build confidence with city staff as well. And we've managed to take a lot of that information and also share that with our colleagues in other municipalities. So we're actually quite pleased with the level of activity versus a very small investment each year.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Item 2.2, Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 2.2 is dealing with amendments to the traffic and parking bylaw, and specifically my concern is item number 1, the no stopping at any time on King Street. While I recognize that this is an adjustment because of road work that's going to be going on Dundas Street and York Street, when I read in here that we are recommending no stopping at any time zones on the north side of King Street from right out to Colburn to remove the 2-hour parking 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. and the loading zones. It creates a real problem for me. We have had this problem before us already with regard to the temporary bike lane that we're putting in on King Street, which is removing some on-street parking from the businesses there, even though we're going to remove that bike lane in 2 or 3 years' time. One of the concerns that the businesses expressed was the fact that they need loading zones to get product into their businesses, and not all of these businesses have rear load options for them. I appreciate that King Street is going to be a traffic mess during construction. There will no doubt be extremely high use. But I have some real concerns about the loading zone removal. We've got Covent Garden Market there, and I realize that we've got the market lane that trucks can pull in from behind. But that's not a space that works for places on the south side of King Street, which are now, because of the bike lane, reliant on the north side of King Street loading zones to get their product across the street and into their shops. Through you to staff, while I appreciate the reasoning behind this, I question how we're going to accommodate business loading for the businesses located on King Street, particularly from Rideout to Wellington. I know once we get past Wellington to Colborne, there's really not a huge challenge there, but from Rideout to Wellington, there certainly is. So how are we going to accommodate those businesses?
Through the chair, the changes outlined in the amendment on the agenda tonight is consistent with what was shown in the Civic Works Committee report last summer for the bike lane project. And they implement what is required for that bike lane project. So it is a very constrained right of way. It's narrow and trying to squeeze a lot into between the existing curbs requires trade-offs, and those trade-offs were presented. We're certainly very cognizant of the challenges that these create to the business community, and we've worked through many of those with the assistance of the Downtown London BIA and additional one-on-one interactions, and they're all, like, with respect to parking, it is recognized, and we're implementing strategies at a high level with the downtown parking strategy, but then also locally with the creation of short-term parking in the Budweiser Gardens parking lot. We're updating the downtown parking guide. We're also creating 41 new parking spots with the creation of the 131 high-rise development. So that's how we're addressing the parking. The loading is those challenges are very unique, and they're often very business specific. So we're talking with businesses, and the Covent Garden Market loading zone we were able to maintain, as well as an additional one near the Tricar, the Renaissance Tower. There are others that were identified for displacement, and we're working through those challenges with business owners and looking to side streets as alternatives, and so they tend to be very, very specific, and those issues are being worked through, if that helps.
Okay, so if I heard you correctly, Mr. McCray, is that through you, Chair, the loading zones on the north side of King in front of Covent Garden Market are going to be maintained? So those spaces where we've cut, for lack of I don't know what the proper term is, so I'm going to call it the equivalent of a bus bay cutout where they can sort of get out of traffic, those will be maintained and accessible for loading.
Yes, that is correct. The loading zone immediately in front of the Covent Garden Market, just west of their parking garage entrance, we're able to maintain that. It was a lot of focus. We heard at the public meetings with the Downtown London Forum last summer that was critical to their operation. And it is a tight squeeze through there, but the road opens up a bit and we're able to maintain that loading zone.
And just to be clear, on the diagrams that we have in front of us, it shows on the south side existing parking, but is that correct? Because I thought that would be removed with the temporary bike lanes.
The south side parking will be finalized once the construction of the bike lane is complete. So there certainly will be changes. The design does squeeze in as much parking on the south side between the new transit loading islands as possible. So we're going to see how much is possible and then finalize that with a future bylaw amendment.
Can I get a timeline then? So when would parking be removed from King Street, essentially? Will there be a time when there's no parking available at any section along King Street for the merchants between Rideout and Wellington?
So the construction that's underway requires space, and that'll be accommodated, only taken away on an as-needed basis. So the impacts for that will be localized So I anticipate, you know, without delving into the details of the construction schedule, I would expect that there should always be some parking throughout the corridor. And then it's just the bylaw, that the parking would become available at the end of the construction project, and then the bylaw would follow shortly thereafter.
I'm slow, I'm sorry. And I'm really concerned about this summer because there's a lot of construction going around in the area, and the folks on King Street are having a lot of challenges with parking being disrupted. This summer, will there be parking and loading available other than the one for Covent Garden Market for independent merchants along King Street?
The two loading zones that we are able to maintain will remain functional. There could be short-term disruptions, and the construction team, our core construction team, will work through those with the businesses that predominantly use those two loading zones. And the same goes for the parking. Similar to any construction project, it's a very fluid activity. We try to minimize impacts in it, but as the construction processes roll through the corridor, there will be impacts, and those will be communicated as well as possible, either through messaging if it's longer term impacts, but with the quick nature of this project, it'll be done quite quickly. It'll be more just signage and construction zone information.
Just if I could briefly comment, because I want to be fair to staff, that the bike lane decision that was initially made during last term was a council decision. It wasn't something that staff brought to council and said, please look at doing this. It was actually councilors, some councilors who brought that forward, and it was passed. And similarly, this term, council again passed the same thing. So I want to be fair to staff. They're trying to make accommodations with something that elected officials decided to do.
And these, again, these are the temporary bike lanes that we're looking at. And when will these be taken out?
The new configuration of King Street will remain until the Downtown Loop Rapid Transit project is built. The exact timing of that is unknown. You know, the funding submissions have been submitted to the senior government, and we need to wait and hear back on the success of those applications. We are optimistic and starting to work on potential rollouts of the projects, but I don't have an exact timing for you as of yet.
Okay, thank you. And a number of us voted against this this project, the temporary bike lanes. What would be the impact of voting against this again today? Were to be defeated?
That might be a political question. We can vote as we wish, but
Okay.
I don't know if staff wants to comment on what the effect of our vote would be.
Yes, I mean, in terms of a practical thing, or what would happen if, I mean, it could conceivably, a political thing could happen where this was voted down. What would that mean
Okay.
to this
So
project?
what would, if it was changed, what would the traffic flow impact be?
Currently it's in a construction zone, and it's being managed similar, you know, as a construction zone. But if this bylaw is not passed, it would have a significant impact on the traffic flow on King Street, and parking would still, you know, we're down to 2 lanes with no additional space to maneuver. The parking in the north side lane would essentially cause significant disruption to traffic flow, and in particular during the peak hours, i.e. the morning and afternoon rushes.
So, and through the chair, so I think you're saying by having these lanes be cycle lanes instead, which are thinner, that gives us more room for the construction. Is that what I'm hearing?
I'm sorry, through the chair, could you rephrase that?
Okay, so if, I guess I'm just trying to understand what would happen, if we didn't pass this, and you were saying that the parking would still remain, and that would be a problem for the construction?
If this bylaw was not passed, it would not so much be a problem for the construction, it would impact the, like, I guess it could affect, yeah, it could affect enforcement through the construction phase, but it would also affect traffic flow on King Street in the future after construction is complete, which, you know, it's a fairly short duration project, and so you know, throughout the summer and fall, it would affect traffic flow on King Street, and that it would reduce it down to one lane whenever there's parking on that north side.
Okay, thank you. And I realize that that turned out to be a really hard question to answer because of this is a very complex situation, so sorry for that, but I appreciate your response.
Anything further on that? Councillor Lewis?
Just one quick one, Mr. Chair, through you to staff. And I realize that issues can come up that require a longer duration. But what is the estimated length of time that the bike lane construction project will take?
We are implementing it as quickly as possible. The estimated time frame is 6 to 8 weeks, and we're aiming for the low end of that schedule, and construction is already underway.
Nothing further then? I don't think we have someone to move it and second it. Moved by Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Pelosa. Anything further? We'll call the vote.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Moving on then to item scheduled items. Item 3.1 is the public lane policy review, and we have a delegation request with that from a M. Coke Denemy. And I see a letter. I don't know if she was here to make a delegation or whether that was the, oh, sorry, I didn't see you, that you were down here. I don't know if the delegation's been approved yet, so perhaps we could just move and second that. Moved by, I'm sorry.
Was at a September meeting.
It was at the September meeting, all right? So if you come to the podium, and I don't know if there's a staff presentation first or whether, and then we'll do the delegation. That might help you a little bit because you'll get to hear what staff says before you speak. Did you have a report or did you just want
to? We have a short verbal update just to complement the report, if that's
okay, why don't you do that first and then Ms. Denemy can speak.
Okay, so laneways were created 100 years ago, so they come with legacy issues, and each one of them tends to be unique. They're long linear parcels that are not easily maintained or divested. So our policy approach here in London is flexible enough to enable communities, gives a few options to improve these areas. And with that, I'll let Mr. Irwin describe some of the complexities and potential improvement opportunities.
Thank you. The issue we're going to hear today involves untraveled city-owned public lanes and the problems they can sometimes create for the abutting landowners. The city's policy for permanently closing lanes requires that they be legally closed as public highway and be disposed of in their entirety by being conveyed to the abutting property owners. This prevents orphaned landlocked parcels from being created and ensures the lane corridor is completely eliminated. The closing process generally requires the consent of all of the property owners affected by the closing, which can be difficult to obtain. As a case in point, in 2011, the city received a petition to close the very lane that we'll be hearing about today. But notwithstanding the offer of a subsidized closing process supported by council, in the end, there was insufficient support from all of the affected property owners to enable the city to close the lane, so the petition could not be supported. Considering the difficulties in closing lanes, as well as often a general lack of knowledge or a general lack of interest in pursuing the process, of the roughly 400 lanes in the city, currently more than half are no longer traveled, but still legally exist as corridors of city-owned property. Since lanes are not assumed by the city, maintenance is generally left to the abutting property owners to deal with. Not surprisingly, untraveled lanes tend to fall into various states of neglect. Combating vacant lane problems can be challenging. For example, reporting criminal behavior to the police is likely to be met with very limited success simply because the police cannot monitor lane activity 24/7. With the city's new informed response program, some response and cleanup is possible where there's evidence of struggling individuals sleeping rough. However, property owner concerns may reoccur in the absence of more affirmative action being taken. Assuming untraveled lanes for maintenance is not seen as a long-term solution. Rather, experience has shown that vacant lane problems have essentially been eliminated by adjacent property owners simply taking over and occupying them. This has been done unilaterally as well as in cooperation with neighbors and often involves extending fences and closing the lane whereafter property owners maintain the lane as they would their own property. Since such informal occupations, as we call them, are contrary to the streets bylaw, the city cannot grant permission nor condone such action. Though we cannot formally recommend this as an option, we would be remiss not to acknowledge that such action appears to be an effective solution for those property owners prepared to assume the risk of fencing in and occupying land they don't rightfully own. The city's long-standing practice in the face of such quiet occupation has generally been to take no action, provided other municipal bylaws are observed. To be clear, if a property owner chooses to fence in and occupy an untraveled lane, they do so at their own risk and expense and implicitly accept that they are responsible for removing the fence and any obstruction should the lane or another property owner wish to use the lane for its originally intended purpose. However, our experience is that this is rare. There's also an option for a property owner to enter into a license agreement with the city to temporarily occupy an untraveled lane. Such license agreements typically require the property owner to provide liability insurance and may involve license fees. All such agreements contain a provision allowing the city to terminate the license agreement should the city or another property owner wish to start using the lane. In summary, where untraveled lanes lead to concerns for abutting property owners and a permanent closing is not otherwise achievable, there are options available to the property owners who are free to choose which is best for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Irwin. So you having heard that, you're free, you have 5 minutes to speak. So whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Sorry, I have pictures of my alleyway. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at them.
I had the idea, were they loaded in the machine?
They're here on, I sent them in an email to,
I just want to see if I'm checking and they are here?
they're on the screen
There they are.
right now.
There you go.
I do have a little speech that I had prepared. Part of it is what was just read, so I'm just going to read through it right now and then go through my photos. So thanks for having me today. It's not the bylaw per se that I want changed, but I would just like to see some action from the city in respect to the activity going on in my alleyway. So as a little background for you, I've lived in my home on Redan Street since 1996. It's a charming little neighborhood, a quirky little street that's had its ups and downs. We've had the opening of the coffee house, which has been great, the Canadian Mental Health Coffee House, which has been great for the neighborhood and great for the unfortunate people there, but it's also been part of the downfall of the neighborhood because a lot of the clientele frequent the alleyway behind the house, and that's where a lot of the problems come from. As stated, back in 2011, I was part of the neighborhood petition to try and get the alleyway initially closed. We were successful in having the city accept our petition, but ultimately it failed because the majority of the neighbors changed their mind and did not agree. A large part of this was due to the fact that there are a large number of rental houses on both sides of the street. So it's not the owners that live there and are affected by the problem. Also, the majority of the alleyway problems are in the north end of the alley and not in the south end of the alley. So that was another issue. You may not be able to see from the photos that I'm going to show you, but there is a huge issue with the 3-story walk-up on Memora and a lot of the garbage coming from it. Also the drug use and all the drug paraphernalia that's strewn about. The alley is unmaintained by the city and it is left to the property owners to clean it up. I myself am out there on a regular basis cleaning this up almost every week. I'm out there picking up needles, picking up dime bags, used condoms, syringes, everything. This puts my health at risk. It puts the safety of other people at risk. It shouldn't be done. The overgrowth of the vegetation makes it a perfect haven for the drug use and prostitution and in the squatting. In the discussion that was put out by Kelly, it recommends that if sections of the lane can be isolated without affecting the larger neighborhood, such partial closings can be considered for closing. So that's what I'm asking. That's mainly what I'm looking for, is just a partial closing of the laneway to my section of the alleyway. My next door neighbor wants to keep his part of the alley open so that he can supposedly bring his truck down there. I'm not quite sure how he's going to get his truck down there into his backyard, but that's what he wants. So, for examples, when I say I want the alleyway closed off because the majority of the action is what happened, what I have seen in the last 2 years in the alleyway has been rampant drug use, the garbage being strewn about. I have seen acts of fellatio being performed behind my house, acts of sexual intercourse, gentlemen masturbating in the alleyway at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. I have a privacy fence. This is still being seen from my backyard. This is not what my child needs to see, which is why I'm imploring you to try and close this. In the recommendation, in the discussion, it does say that the city cannot assume responsibility of the lanes and that we can't report criminal behavior. I have been in contact with the police corps many times. They have been out many times to the alleyway to try and clear up the neighborhood. They're familiar with the people that are back there. I've talked to Shane Maddox multiple times. I've had the alleyway cleaned up twice within the last 4 months of the garbage, but they will not come and pick up the drug paraphernalia. And I can't get hold of anybody else to come and clean it up, so I'm left to do it myself for my own safety. Going on to state, I have been told that I can put a fence up myself, and that's the best thing for me. But again, I take the risk of having it taken down by the city or you guys ordering me to take it down. So I don't know what my options are. The statement where it says,
Just so you know, you have 1 minute remaining.
okay. It goes on to finally say, it must not be forgotten that the simplest solution to property owners combating the vacant lane is to simply erect a privacy fence. This is a little bit insulting because the privacy fence is up and it does not solve the problem. The only thing that I can see solving the problem is getting that laneway closed or getting a fence built and taking it into my own hands. These are some examples of the photos that I've taken. Here's all the dime bags, here's used condoms, syringes. This was 2 months ago. This was last week. So my house is here with the garage right here in the back, or this is my shed. People are back there all the time. Before I cut down all of these trees, this is where everybody would congregate behind my property. They would torment my child when he was outside, curse and swear at my child. They would torment my dog, throw their garbage into my backyard. I don't need syringes in my backyard. I don't need used condoms in my backyard. I want my safe neighborhood for my child.
Okay, you've now used up your 5 minutes. If you
Yeah,
just want
that's-
to close briefly, or is that? You can show
All
the
I'm
pictures.
asking you is to come out and spend some time in my neighborhood, spend some time in this alleyway and actually live the life that I live and see what it's like being there. It just seems so cliche that build a fence and the privacy fence will take care of it all. That's not the case when you look at these pictures. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming. You can have a seat, and then the committee will
Okay,
discuss
thank
this.
you.
All right, committee has the report. Do you mind if I ask a question of clarification? What does it actually mean what happens if you close a laneway? Like people keep talking about closing a laneway. Tell me what happens and what it looks like when you close a laneway. If the city says we're going to close this laneway.
The lanes are a legal public highway by definition. So in order for the city to deal with the lane, it needs to be closed, and that's done by bylaw now. And that simply removes the lane, the legal public highway status from the lane. Then it just becomes city-owned property, just like a park. And then we can deal with it, sell it, lease it, do whatever we need to do. But the issue is, in our experience, is that simply closing a lane as public highway and walking away does nothing. Once you have an established traffic pattern, pedestrians using it or what have you, they'll continue to use that. It's even sometimes suggested that, well, the city could fence the end of the lanes, for example. But again, experience is that if you have a traffic pattern that's established and you fence the ends of the lanes, the fences will simply just be cut. The lane needs to be disposed of. It needs to be taken over and occupied generally by the abutting owners. That's the only way to really deal with the situation.
The committee didn't mind me getting that clarification. I'll turn it over to the committee. Councillor Lehman.
Just a question to the delegate. Have you contacted London Cares to do the cleanup of the drug paraphernalia, et cetera? How recently were you told that?
When they first came and cleaned up the alley in January.
So you were told that London Cares will not clean up the drug paraphernalia?
That they don't do it anymore, that there's another department that does, and Officer Weaver was to get back to me, and I haven't received an email from him. And then it snowed, so the alleyway was not that bad in the wintertime, but now that the spring is here, it's getting worse again.
Just to clarify, I think it's informed response now that does it, but there is someone who does it, but it's informed response, then that new organization who I think does this. And we could always get you that information going forward. Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, Chair, and through you to staff. In reading the report, a couple of things stood out for me. In the lane closings and dispositions, there was the comment that the city cannot forcibly convey the lane to unwilling property owners. And then further on in the lanes in other municipalities, it mentions a few municipalities have adopted or are considering a subsidized program to dispose of untraveled lanes. When we are interested in closing a lane and divesting ourselves of that property, and frankly, through a term on Committee of Adjustment, I've seen the problems that lanes can cause with other neighborhood issues as well. So it seems to me like getting rid of these would actually be a good idea. Are we actually charging the property owners to convey this land to them? Because the term subsidized program leads me to believe that we're asking them to pay, albeit at a discounted price, but to pay for the land that we're trying to give to them.
Yes, through the chair, the process to close and dispose of lane is unfortunately a little bit complex. There is the need to legally close it as public highway. That requires a bylaw, that's low cost. A reference plan is likely going to be required because the lane is going to be likely divvied up, and that's a registry office requirement, so there's several $1,000s in costs there. And normally the city would convey or sell property at fair market value. In these types of scenarios, my experience is that a nominal cost would be put on the actual purchase price. The transaction also requires the services of a lawyer. So while the costs can be controlled, if you will, they're not zero. The city could, if it chose to do so, subsidize all of the costs and basically offer the closed lane for no cost if it chose to do so. But there's still no legal requirement for the abutting property owner to accept it. We can't force it on the abutting property owners. And the reality is that not everywhere in the city, but many property owners are already occupying the lane, so they would see no benefit in it for them. And we're talking maybe 5 or 6 feet if you're splitting the lane. It's not an awful lot of land, has very limited value, obviously.
Yeah, a follow-up to that then, because I would suspect that one of the barriers to getting them to take this land that we would like to convey to them, if we chose to go that route, is seeing a sticker price. So when we have these discussions with property owners, are they being given a cost value to them so that they, I mean, really, are they being told that this is the bill if we're going to give you this land? And if that's the case, I could see that as being a barrier. So I want to know if they're getting an actual cost estimate.
Through the chair, yes, the current process or practice is that the proponent pays. So somebody wants to come in and approach the city and buy their lane if they can meet the requirements. They would be expected to pay for all costs, no matter how we set the price on the actual purchase price. The survey fees, lawyers' fees, et cetera, would be theirs to deal with. Could you repeat the question again?
Sorry, I'm just looking, what I'm asking is, when we are considering this option and are conveying to homeowners that the opportunity to have this land conveyed to them is a possibility, are they being quoted a cost for assuming that land?
Thank you. Yes. We can summarize the approximate costs on the first call. They can call me and we can talk about it over the phone. It's that simple. But of course, I cannot offer, without council support, any subsidization. So our process is right now they have to pay all of the costs themselves. It would require a special direction from council to waive those costs. So far, that's rarely been offered because we don't get that many inquiries.
Why don't we clarify by saying, if these people wanted to buy this laneway, give us a ballpark of what it would cost them? Or a laneway, like give us an idea, otherwise we're gonna talk all day about how much it costs, and maybe it costs very little, I don't know.
Yeah, if I could add, Mr. Urban is referring to the standard process. There was, this particular laneway was brought to the attention of council back in 2011 timeframe. And there was a special process set up to try to close and divest the city of it, to try to transfer ownership to the adjacent property owners, and subsidies were implemented. Mr. Urban can talk to it in more detail, but essentially I think the land value was assigned at $1. There was the city coordinated a survey approach to lower the survey costs to a nominal fee shared by all property owners. And there was also a coordinated approach on the legal fees. So it was relatively low cost, and but even with that, due to various interests along the corridor, there was a low response rate. Less than half the property owners would still wanted to participate.
Go ahead, Councillor Lewis, if you have a question.
Thank you, Chair, and this is my final question on this. Obviously, there is an issue with these laneways that is costing us as a city an ongoing price tag. Even though it has to be initiated by essentially an owner complaint, the city will send in a maintenance team to clear brush, we will send in the core unit to clear up drug paraphernalia and that kind of thing, and that's not done for free. So I guess my comment through you to my colleagues, Chair, and to staff is I really think I'd like to see us come back with a solution that I know we can't give it away for zero, but if we could absorb the survey and registry costs up front, we're saving money in the long run in terms of maintenance costs. Even if it takes us 10 years to recoup that, it's eliminating a problem that we have. So I guess what I'm doing there is just offering a comment to my colleagues. I see a problem here that somehow we have to tackle.
Councillor Van Holst.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to my colleagues, I'm thrilled that we're actually looking at a solution. So that's that's great. I think what's been suggested is a good way to go move forward. I believe that the cost we were going to ask for the residents in this particular situation, was it about $500 through you, Doris?
Yes, actually, in the 2011 example, the city negotiated a survey cost of $500 per property for each property owner who wished to purchase their portion of the lane. The price of the lane was set at $1, and they were working with the community lawyers, I understand it, to defray the actual legal costs on their end. So the total cost really would be marginally above $500 per property, and the city offered to add that $500 amount to their taxes for a 10-year no-interest payout. So in my experience, that's extraordinary, although it's not zero, and yet we were unable to achieve broad support even with those accommodations.
Thank you very much for that.
Do you have another question?
Oh, please, I'll have more questions, yes,
Okay, go ahead.
so, yeah, thank you. I'm glad this came back. This was in a report that I requested last year, and I'm also glad that the delegate was able to come. So, this lane has got two sides, two streets on it. Some of this is fairly low income. One of the streets is. So I can see where people, if they were offered or said, hey, for $500, we'll give you a small piece of land, they wouldn't want it. But as has been pointed out by Councillor Lewis and also the delegate, there's problems going on here that will be worth it for us to solve for this $500. So I'm certainly going to move that we look at divesting this particular lane, and I don't think we can do it with all lanes, but this particular one by covering these costs. Maybe we need the $1 for contractual purposes, and it was pointed out that someone may not want the dollar. However, if this is a lane between Councillor Lewis and I, and he doesn't want it, then I could pay $2 and take both parts of that lane. And if neither of us wanted it, then one of our neighbors could take that. As a matter of fact, I believe it's possible, and I'll ask through the chair to staff, one person could take the whole lane if we closed it, so that's a possibility as well. And maybe I could just have that confirmed.
Again, I think we're talking about different terms. We're talking about closing it versus selling it. So can we?
Okay, so
can we get our terminology? Closing it means the city closes it off and has to sell it? Is that what I'm?
The current policy is to close and sell.
Right.
We will not accept an application to close only.
Okay. So I hope the committee will eventually move to doing something rather than talking about how we're going to solve this. That's just a suggestion. So we'll keep going. Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you. So there was a question, and I'm just trying to establish the fact that if there is one person unwilling to buy it, it can still be sold. And so my question through you is, it's even possible for one person to buy the entire lane.
Okay, so why don't we get that question answered? Now that you've asked it 4 or 5 times. Can someone answer the question of, if you have a laneway and there's 10 houses on it and only one person is willing to buy, could that person buy the whole lane? And would we, it seems that Councillor Van Holst wants us to sell it to that person for not some really low number. Is that possible or feasible?
Yes, it is. As long as the lane or the large majority of the lane is disposed of, yes, they can. The issue that you get into is that we need the consent for a large number, a large majority of the property owners, keeping in mind that the city, although the city has the power to forcibly close and convey the lane, we own it, we can be sued if a property owner can prove injurious affection is caused by them by us forcibly closing the lane. That is why it can be a difficult issue and we require the large majority of the supporter in order to close and convey.
One more question, then we'll go to another committee member.
Okay, well, if there's another, I think I've established the point that it certainly can be done. And I think I'd like to move that for this particular lane, that we close the lane and divest ourselves of it by covering cover the costs.
Is there a seconder for that motion? Do you have a question about the motion? Go ahead.
I'm of the understanding that we can't unilaterally do that. We have to get a majority of people to agree to that.
I've asked a couple of questions, Mr. Chair. You can come back to me. I'd like to give Councillor Ploza a chance first.
Thank you. I have a question regarding the motion and a question still outstanding from the original point in which we began. In regards to the motion, my question and hesitation to Councillor Van Holst's motion would just be the staff, the actual cost that we might be taking on in regards to the legal ramification. For clarity, you had mentioned, what was that word? You used a lawyer term. I was looking for clarity. Was it just that we can prove, like if they could prove that harm's been done by us closing this? Okay, perfect. Yes. Also, I'll leave my question there, my only hesitation, or knowing from staff what the cost of this would be. That's just my clarification. Yeah, the cost of, if we were to take the property and just basically give it away, like what the fees would be involved in doing that with lawyers' surveys of the financial impact onto the city's budget.
I think I can answer that. It's really a risk issue. If we got a reasonably large, a strong enough majority of property owners that were supportive of the closing, but not all, Civic Administration would assess the risk, consulting our risk management department and legal, and ultimately take forward a report for council to approve. The risks are not high, particularly in situations where lanes are not traveled. Obviously, if a lane is traveled, that's a different matter. So it depends on the circumstances. But generally speaking, we would expect to have the support of a significant number of property owners before we embarked on such or accepted an application.
Do you have another question? No? Who else? Can I go to someone else before? Did someone else have a question? Councillor Lewis, thank you.
Yes, and I think I'm going to be tagging on to what Councillor Pelosi asked, but by my count on Google Maps, we've got 20 properties between Redan and the other street, I've closed the map now, so I forget. But if we're talking about 500 roughly, we're talking about a $10,000 impact on the city roughly to divest these properties, provided that the majority of homeowners are willing to have the land conveyed to them. Would that be a fair assessment of what we're talking about through you, Mr. Chair, to staff, understanding that these are very ballpark figures?
Those the fees were primarily identified, they were for survey fees 8 years ago. Obviously, they would be adjusted likely upwards. So you could argue that the cost would be approximately same, somewhat higher due to inflation.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can we just get the initial wording of Councillor Van Holst's motion again? Because I'm supportive of the direction he's trying to take it, but I'm not entirely sure that the wording accomplishes that.
Okay, well, thank you. And perhaps we could, if staff understands the direction we're going, perhaps you can provide some wording as well. But my direction is to close the lane and divest it to the adjacent property owners at the city's cost. I'll also point out, just as to reassurance, I've talked about this lane previously. I have a video of me sort of crashing through the woods. It's overgrown in the summer. No vehicles travel this except in the very far end where it's one person's driveway. So they would just have that driveway. But all the rest of it, there's no cars traveling in it. The amount of junk there and paraphernalia is alarming. At one point I picked up, there was an entire shopping bag of drug paraphernalia, unused, just left there. So solving this problem for this amount of money would be, I think, very valuable. I do point out, though, that there was also legal fees involved that we would be covering as well, so it might be...
I think the question was, do you have a motion?
Well, I think my motion is, and do I need...
You need wording for a motion.
Yes, I believe that I said, close the lane, divest the property at the city's cost. Divest the property to the adjacent property owners. Is that not the motion that I suggest? Okay, so I've said that a number of times now.
I will get out of the chair in a second and speak strongly to this, but maybe staff wants to have their input right now.
If there is a direction provided to staff to take more proactive action, I would suggest that the initial step of surveying the neighborhood to gauge interest as to a potential closing of the lane and next steps would be appropriate. There are, as Mr. Irwin has described, there's risks associated with the city unilaterally imposing that upon owners. And I don't want to speak any more to that without legal present, but I do think that there is a risk there. And so a less definitive direction to staff that involves a neighborhood consultation would be more appropriate in my mind.
Councillor Squire.
I've listened to this discussion, and it appears to me what we're trying to do is make a decision on the fly without trying to consider all of the ramifications. So we're making a lot of assumptions. We're making the assumption that if some of the neighbors don't want to buy, they're going to be content or satisfied with one or two people buying that property, them having control and ownership of it, them assuming control of it, possibly to the detriment of some of those neighbors who now view that as an area that is somehow in common. The other issue is that we have not heard in any detail from any of the other residents on this street as to what their desire or wish is. We've heard from one person. I understand the views very clearly. And what she wants. But I think rather than just going to the decision of saying, we're going to close it, we're going to divest it, that's the decision, I think we should be looking for a report back to consider all the ramifications of that decision. The other thing is, we have 400 of these laneways in the City of London. So to me, what we're effectively doing, if we decide that we're going to take this position with this laneway, we have to take a consistent position with all laneways of this type across the city, because you can't treat one group differently than another. So we'll be effectively subsidizing all of these different areas. So I won't be supporting a motion to do that all today. I'd be happy to support a motion for a referral back to get a fulsome report on this issue as to what the implications would be.
Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Chair, and through you, I'm going to put forward an amendment to the motion from, or perhaps it'll be a friendly amendment and we can just get this wording hammered out and deal with this. So I am going to propose that the motion actually read that staff be directed to survey the impacted property owners with the view to close and divest the property to the adjacent owners at the price of $1, with all other costs being assumed by the city. And then a part B, and that staff be directed to report back on potential changes to the bylaw to deal with future lane divestments.
Do you consider that a friendly?
Yes, I would. And I will also, in response to your own comments, Mr. Chair, say that these lanes are all very different. People use them for different reasons. For this particular lane, this will be an excellent solution. I have other lanes in my ward. I have many of these for which this would not be the solution I would bring forward.
Sorry, thank you.
You can call him your
Thanks.
worship, he'll appreciate that.
Yeah, I didn't want to flatter him too much when he's sick. I'll go right to his head with the drugs combined. Thank you, Chair, for recognizing me, and I did fail to recognize Ms. Denom and her work that she's been doing, bringing this forward. And my only other concern as we go through this, talking about closing laneways and parting up the parcels of land, of just making sure that a fence or something's rectified, that one neighbor in the middle doesn't put up a fence and then people are jumping it and it doesn't actually close the laneway and fix the problem, that people just get niches and then can sneak in further. Also, as we're going through this process, that if one resident want to buy, so I'm gonna assume the lane's 11 feet wide-ish?
Typically, the lanes in the city are 10 to 12 feet wide, yes.
That if one of the neighbors butting onto it want to buy not just 5, but the whole 11, that we allotted for that as we went, would maybe be half as many deals we had to make.
It's what the process I envision, based on the draft resolution, is that the city would poll the property owners and find out who would be interested, who would support the closing at no cost, and would they be interested in purchasing all or a portion of the lane abutting their properties. We would compile the results and bring that forward to council for further direction.
Councillor Lehman, sorry, I overlooked your question. Go ahead.
Obviously, we have an issue that needs to be solved here, and I think that's what we're dancing around. What I'd like to know is, and I'm not sure if the right people are here that can answer this question. Let's say it was divested and the people made it into a private, part of their private property. Would that solve this problem? Or would that, or would just be different, would they have to now go to the police because there's trespassing on private property, as opposed to going to the police because there's illegal activity going on in a public space?
As for the original presentation, our experience is once the lanes are closed and taken over, fenced in, occupied by the neighbors, like the whole neighborhood, that absolutely eliminates all of these problems outright.
So just to expand on Mr. Irwin's comment, it does require a moving of fences in to occupy the lane, right? So that there is a more, somewhat of a formal occupation, right? And the creation of the space becoming a part of backyards as opposed to the lane just remaining in the sort of fenced off state that it currently is.
Enemy, what she thinks would happen in the lane?
Sure,
I think she
to the delegate.
It's unusual, but she may.
What do you envision if
Do you want to
everyone
come up
were-
and stand at the microphone so we can all hear you? I know you've been patient. Maybe you'd like to just let us know the question is, what do you think would happen if we did this? If we said, we're going to close it, we're going to sell it to you, how many, for nothing, how many of you want to take it? And then what would happen afterwards? Would people take over the lane?
Honestly, I have a feeling it won't fly. I feel like I'm wasting my time here because it's not going to work. It didn't work in 2011. There are so many rental properties on both sides of the street, lower income. Some people just don't care. The people, if you had looked at my pictures, you can't see the full effect of the picture. I am the second house in from the entrance of the alleyway on Hamilton. It's not even starts on Hamilton Road. It starts a little bit farther down. So I am the second house in, which is why I was just asking for even a partial closing from the first property to my property. I don't even want it closed. If I can just build a fence myself and take over that 12-foot section of laneway behind my property and not have the city come after me and tell me that I have to take my fence down after my partner and I spend all the time building it, I would be happy with that.
But what would can I just, and I don't want
Sure.
to, I understand your point, but what happens if only you and one other person are prepared to buy that laneway? Would you be prepared to take control of that much of that laneway?
I don't want the entire laneway.
Yeah.
The entire laneway is 500, I don't even know how long it is to go from
Right.
the north end to the south end.
Right, okay.
I'm concerned, because again, as I said, the problem is not in the south end. The problem ends basically at the end of my property, because the way the fence line is, the way the vegetation is, right behind my house is the perfect haven for everyone to hide to do their drug
Oh,
use,
we
which is why I cut down all the trees.
We understand that. What we're trying to do is find a
Yeah.
solution, and
Yeah,
the committee
and
think.
I know based on what happened in 2011, because I worked tirelessly on that in 2011, it didn't fly, it's not gonna fly again. So honestly, I think you'd be wasting your time trying to get it surveyed to see what owners down in the south end, because I know they'll say no.
Councillor Van Holst?
Thank you very much. So I would point out that this is an area where we're doing substantial urban regeneration along Hamilton Road. I know people who are moving into this area and have quite a bit of pride, taking quite a bit of pride in their homes. And I believe that this will make the properties more valuable, more likely to be sold, we are in a different climate now from 2011 when this was first tried, and it's probably worth the effort, at least for staff, to go forward and do this survey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just in clarification to this, as we're saying with all other costs to be assumed by the city, I would like to make sure that that's not the cost of building everyone fences.
Saying all other costs opens the door to all other costs.
So what were the wording?
Land transfer costs or?
Yeah, just costs of, with all other land transfer costs. Can I just ask one question? What if we sell a piece of this property to someone and they just go, hey, I'm not putting up a fence, I own it, but I don't want to put up a fence? Well, you can't do anything, can you? This is not a facetious question. How can you make a person, would it be part of the transfer or is it just?
Well, there's no obligation to relocate a fence. That's a private property decision.
Councillor Van Holst, do you think you have an answer?
Well, one answer is that not everybody has to build a fence.
Right.
Right, so if somebody doesn't want the property, somebody could build a fence all the way across. Or I mean, when I have a neighbor, we don't have two fences usually. One of them builds a fence or they build it together.
No, but my point was that if they don't build a fence, are you solving the problem? And I don't want to debate with you, but how are you solving? If everybody buys those pieces of property, don't put up fences, and you still have this laneway, how does that solve your problem? People are still going to come down there and use drugs.
Well, I certainly think
It's just-
that in this instance, if we were to go through with this, our delegate would build a fence.
Okay.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Moving on to items for direction, 4.1 is opt-in green bin service motion. Councillor Van Holst, it's your motion. I'll let you lead off.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and through you to my colleagues. We are anticipating coming back to us a report from staff and a suggestion for a green bin program that's that itself would cost about $5 million. And I believe that we were looking at mixed waste use, but at some point that was taken off the table. So I think just one solution is going to come to us, and it's a green bin that will cost to the levy $5 million. My priority is housing, and I would like to see monies like that go in a different direction. And so I looked at some other options, and this is one. So what I'd like to do is have staff prepare some details for this and come back with it as another option. I believe that people would be willing to do this. Those that are very interested in having a green bin service would be willing to do this. And if we got 15% of the 125,000 homes willing to opt into a paid program, that would be able to cover those costs. And as more people see what's being done and follow suit, then these costs would go down. But it's a way not to hit the tax levy, and it avoids some wasted costs. As you see in my letter here, we know that the uptake for these programs is not 100%, and I'm estimating we would probably end up buying $3 million worth of green bins that would never be used. And so that's another way to avoid that waste. So I'm looking for staff to bring us a few more details on a more cost-effective way to deal with organic waste. My comments about housing, maybe I'll follow up and just add a little more about that. Were we to do this program for 20 years or a green bin program, we might be extending the life of the landfill by 1 or 2 years at a cost of $5 million a year. It's much more cost effective to just make it a little bigger. And for 20 years, that would mean $100 million into housing. And that's my priority. So we've got priorities that we have to balance in the city, and I think this is one that provides a pretty good balance. I made some diagrams at the bottom, just showing how it balances out our aspirational goals to have a green bin system, but it's financially practical, and I believe it represents both the citizens who want to have a green bin and those who would elect not to use it.
Perhaps since you're asking for a report back, we could just hear from staff about what would be involved in preparing such a report. What would it, in terms of time, effort, could we do something like that?
Mr. Chair, we could most certainly do our best with something like this. There's very little, well, there's no precedent in Ontario that we're aware of. Perhaps one or two programs in Western Canada that would serve as a bit of a model for us. So we would come forward with our best estimates on how something like this might work in London. I'll be honest, there'll be a lot of guesswork, a lot of crystal ball looking. But we would provide something that would have a very, very wide range of how this might work in London. There's been no research done on whether a program like this would work in London. We would not include any additional research at this point in time in the way of surveys to determine whether Londoners would be willing to pay upwards of $150 for a program like this. We would just basically work with the knowledge we could glean from the few other programs out there in Canada and come forward with our analysis as part of our report, which will be coming to you probably around July.
First of all, I forgot to ask the seconder for this motion. It doesn't appear you have a seconder, so it's not going to go ahead in any event, Council. Moving on to, we need a motion to receive the communication. Councillor Pelosa, seconded by Councillor Lewis, all in, we'll vote. This is a bad week for me.
Get it up there first.
Oh, I can't wait till it's over.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to respond to some of the comments that I made. I think, in terms of a crystal ball and this not being done, I recognize that what I'm bringing forward is something innovative, but that's also something that we should be looking at innovative things. I think largely this is pretty straightforward. We simply need to buy bins and then contract a company to pick them up. So this will be very much in terms of how it's conducted, like whatever green bin program was going to be brought forward otherwise, right? It's very
But the challenge is your motion didn't get seconded, so.
That's fine. That doesn't mean I don't have an opportunity to.
No, let's go ahead.
To discuss it at committee. And of course, it would mean paying for it somehow, and there's options for that too. For instance, London Hydro, we use them to pay for water billing, so we could use them to bill for something like this too. So it's an opportunity to people to step up and have this a little sooner than later, and avoiding some wasted costs. However, I don't see the support here. We'll see what happens at council.
All right, moving on, we're going to go,
We still have to vote.
we still have to vote. Oh.
Michael and Steve.
committee and staff, I want to apologize. I'm just not feeling well, so my difficulty is sort of related to that, and I apologize.
Closing the vote, motion passed 5-0.
Moving on, there's no deferred matters or additional business. We have one confidential matter, which is litigation, potential litigation, solicitor-client privilege advice, and directions and instructions to officers and employees. I just need a motion to go in camera. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. Call the vote. Yes. We're going to adjourn from there. Yes. Thank you very much. I'm glad you guys have figured out I don't know what I'm doing today.
You've trained us well.
And you all have a sense of humor, which is really helpful. I don't have that report.
Closing the vote, motion passes 5-0.